Okay, great. So welcome everyone. Welcome to our weekly conversation on human-computer interaction and the future of work and well-being. It's good to see you and feel free to turn on your cameras. It's nice to feel part of the community. I'd like to first thank the organizers. So that will be Andrew Kuhn, who is here, Linda Boyle, Rafaela Sadoun, John Lee, and myself, and also acknowledge the National Science Foundation for partially funding this event. We're very much looking forward to hearing from you with questions from the audience. So feel free to type your questions in the chat, and Andrew will be monitoring the chat. And please stay online with us for the second part. So following about 30 minutes of conversations, we're going to turn off the cameras and just have kind of a social reception part of the event. So right now, I'm delighted to welcome Audrey Girouard, our friend from Carleton University. She's an associate professor at Carleton University, and she is the director of the Collaborative Learning and Usability Experience, also goes by CLUE program. So welcome, Audrey. Nice to have you with us.
Thanks for the invitation.
Great. So Audrey, I know that in recent years, you've been studying deformable, shape-changing, wearable devices. And this is an area where the technology is evolving quite rapidly. So maybe you can give us some examples of the different kind of materials and technologies that you've been exploring.
Yes, happy to. It's a really interesting area that is about that really thinks about the shape of objects and how the shape of objects can change and can enable different interactions. So this field somewhat started with thinking about phones, sort of focusing on mobile. What if your phone can bend? What if your tablet can bend? What if you can squeeze it? And that really enabled a lot of research. And kind of some of the research has evolved to think about how shape changing and different types of input can change the shape of objects, but beyond just flat rectangular surfaces, which are what tablets and phones are. So what if you can have a stylus that can bend? What if you can have input that is given through your clothes? So a lot of kind of the wearable includes smartwatches, but if we go again beyond kind of the basic commercial devices, what if you have sort of sensors everywhere? How do you design for that? How do you make that input happen? So these are kind of different questions that my lab and I have been, my students and I have been thinking about in the last 10 years or so, and trying to come up with different solutions. So I do have a few videos if you want to kind of
great.
Some of this work. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Let's new. This is Bendy Pass, and Bendy Pass is a project we worked on to use bend gestures as passwords. So you do a series of gestures and they can become a password. And this one was specifically designed for people with vision impairments. So we co-designed with them to create a prototype that was really interesting to touch. So what you can see is there's two different types of silicone that we use, one that's more rigid so that you don't bend there, and then one that's very flexible to afford bending. We have grooves to, again, sort of guide the gestures. And so the little video I'll play is somebody that would create a bend password.
Top right corner down, fold down. Bottom right corner up, fold down. Backspace. Bottom left corner down. Fold up. Enter. You created a new password. Please enter it again to confirm.
So this was part of a study that we did that we ran with people that are blind and people that are low vision. And what we found is that they managed to create a password, they managed to remember it and remember it a week later. And this could be an sort of additional affordance, an additional way that people could input their passwords. For this user population in particular, they're relying on either sound or magnifiers to input their passwords. And so these have some downsides. They're easy to shoulder surf. And so these could be a different way of providing input. Kind of switching to a very different project, and it's one that's going to be presented at TEI in 2 or 3 weeks, is, thank you. This is work from Sarah Nabil that was my postdoc, and he's now faculty member at Queen's, and in collaboration with Lee Jones. And you should watch out, Lee has 5 things at TI this year, so she's a force to be reckoned with. Very impressive. And what we explored was how can we create speakers and embed them in everyday objects and in clothes, because what we learned is that you don't have to have sort of a dedicated rigid speakers. It's something that you can embroider this a conductive thread on any fabric, add a magnet, and essentially you create kind of a DIY speaker. And so this is what we did here. So we sort of looked at where else we could put in speakers. So this is sort of a quick view of the process of designing various speakers in different objects. So this one is going to become a hat, a toque, as we say over here. And the sound is off, but this speaker really is producing some sound and is making music. And we looked at other ways, other objects that we could embed this with. And so another one was a chair. So if you embed a speaker in a chair, then suddenly you can have kind of a safe space, like a space that's your own, where it's not about headphones, so it's more comfortable, but others can't quite hear because it's localized.
Beautiful
information. Yes, Sarah created this beautiful chair.
It's stunning. It's by far the most beautiful speaker that I've seen.
Yeah, and sort of we have done meetings where Sarah was sitting and hearing about it. And another really interesting example of different types of application is putting in a scarf. So and then you become that creates an inclusive speaker that's a lot more comfortable. So I'll stop this here. We also made sort of a few other sort of plushie toy and a t-shirt. But these are really kind of lovely examples. And just kind of finally, oops, here's the last one I wanted to show as a different types of animation. This one is a flexible style.
I think that we don't see it quite yet. I think that you're freezing.
No, the video was done. So we can now sort of bend the sensor to create to enable sort of different types of interactions with it and paint and use it as a digital brush. So these were a few. I'll stop sharing my screen. These were a few of the projects I wanted to share with you.
Here we are. This is some beautiful work. Really kind of the aesthetic and material qualities are so impressive. So my question is, now that we can produce these technologies in the lab, how can you bring people, this is not yet available commercially, so what are some of the methods to allow people to participate? You mentioned Codesign, to participate in Codesign. How do you evaluate these technologies with others? And maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the challenges of evaluating with remote users that we're all experiencing these days.
Yes, these are interesting challenges that we have now.
Audrey, we can't see you, so you might want to turn on the camera.
My camera's on. I don't know why my computer is unhappy at the moment. I run courses that work fine with Zoom, but can you hear me at least?
Yes, we can hear you, so maybe we can keep
Hopefully
talking and it will, yeah.
It'll come back, exactly. Sorry about that. So my students and I run a lot of co-design sessions. We find this to be particularly useful to create objects that are really meaningful and addressing the needs of the potential users. A lot of our work is in the context of accessibility, and so we work with specialized populations, people with really different experiences than our own. So in this case, it's even more important to go from their experience and then sort of learn what it is and build from there. So we start with interviews to understand kind of the context and the pain points that they might be facing. And then we co-design solutions with them. Sometimes they are ones that start sort of sketch.
Did we lose Audrey?
Oh no, I think we might have lost her.
Yeah.
I'm sure she'll be back
Okay.
in a moment.
Yeah, I'm sure she'll be back.
I'm here again. I don't
Hey,
know what
great.
It's Thursday. My computer decided that it's time for the weekend.
It's ready, but it's good to have you back. So
You'll tell me when I stop talking, because I certainly continued for a while, I think.
oh, no. So we just heard kind of in kind of the broader context of accessibility and co-design. So you can take us through, how do you do co-design with people with different abilities?
Right, thank you. So it's really important to start with interviews with sort of whoever you're sort of wanted to design with, because it's important to understand their context, to understand their pain points, and then from there you can start to co-design. So sometimes we start with sort of sketching exercises with them so that they can sort of start a few ideas. Sometimes we use probes to push their thinking further, because they know examples of their real life, and a lot of the research that we do is sort of going quite a few steps beyond. So we give them examples and say, okay, well, if you could design sort of something that would be very different, what would you do? And then often we come back and sort of build it and iterate with them, go back and to them saying, what do you think about this solution? And then in the end, we try to run kind of a study, sometimes controlled experiments of please do these tasks. And sometimes it's about sort of giving them the object and they get to live with it for a little while. In the context of COVID, we've done a lot of remote interviews, and for the projects that we have built, what we've done, for example, was take videos of them working and then giving that back to the participants. Obviously, this is not the same as using it yourself, but it's a reasonable solution given the current constraints, and we can still learn a lot from sort of those follow-up interviews.
Great. So with this kind of participatory design, it kind of led me to thinking, let's think about the context of the future of work and well-being, and bridging that with accessibility. How can we use kind of wearable and shape-changing materials to create work environment that perhaps is more inclusive and bring people with different abilities in?
It's a great question. So one of the avenues we've been thinking about is the use of these tangible, perhaps shape-changing objects that you might have around you. And it could be about reusing an object you already have. Some people have plants, some people have toys, like desk toys, and then adding some shape-changing abilities, perhaps for notification, for sort of this passive ambient information distribution. So that could be a way for you to let people know that maybe they need to take a break. Maybe they need to get up and kind of change position. And in the context of accessibility, this could be useful for people with repetitive strain injuries that need to do this, but they don't want the reminder that will be sort of a solid alarm that like rings now and completely breaks your train of thought. You should be able to finish what you're doing, but kind of like in the periphery, notice that you there's something that tells you, you know what, when your current thought or your current task is done, why don't, like, now would be a good time to go and grab another cup of tea. And again, in the context of accessibility, this could be particularly useful because these are subtle interactions that other people around you may not notice. And that can be a good thing because not all disabilities are sort of disclosed. You may not want to share with your coworkers that you have sort of a repetitive strain injury, again, to use the same example. Some might know, but some might not know because they don't need to. And having an alarm will make them ask a question, but having just kind of something fun and light on your desk may just be very normal. And normal is very good in this context.
That's great. And I really like by the way, I really like the example with the kind of visibility challenges and how people can, with different levels of visual impairments, can use these folding gestures. So obviously, kind of the people that work with you bring multiple talents and learn different skills from electronics to experimental design. I'd like to hear a little bit about kind of your lab environment. How is the lab is structured? I saw beautiful kind of textiles.
I have a very unique lab in a way because nobody has the same background, which sometimes brings challenges, but it really affords for us to learn from sort of each other a lot, and that includes me. So a lot of my students sort of at the master's level come through a Masters of HEI program, which really people from any background can join in, which means that I have people that are interested in the same research topic, but come from occupational therapy or industrial design or anthropology or computer science, and they all bring in their different perspectives, which really means sort of enriching each other's knowledge and having great conversations, because I am not an occupational therapist, but I have one in my lab right now, and she brings it this like different way of thinking about people with disabilities, and sometimes just the right terminology to use that we don't know. We're still sort of learning collectively. Or my first master's student was from industrial design, and so she brought in a lot of the fabrication and sort of the prototyping methodologies that we still use today. The silicone was something that she introduced me to that really worked for a lot of our sort of future prototypes, and she graduated quite a few years ago. And so it's really lovely to be able to integrate a lot of these perspectives. And because there's a lot of sort of overlap from one student sort of coming in and the other one graduating later, sort of like we're passing on this knowledge, and it's something that's quite great.
This is great. So I think we're going to move on to Andrew, and we have some questions.
Yes, so if you have questions, please type them. I see there's one question from Diana. And before we go to Diana, I wanted to quickly ask one question as well, which is, you know, when I saw the embroidering and, you know, putting a speaker in, I thought of our driving simulators and how it would be nice to have, you know, at your home driving simulator. You know, one thing that people do with driving simulators is put a shaker into the seat so you get this rumbling feeling as you're driving. And I'm kind of curious if you've thought about gaming applications. And then also, it seems like it would be really neat applications in augmented / virtual reality for augmenting the sense, the visual sense with with other, well, touch basically, or those sorts of things?
Yeah, so the speaker project, we haven't thought of those applications, but I think it would be really really interesting, because then you can sort of hide speakers in unexpected places, which is handy to reproduce sort of more normal conditions where you don't necessarily all sort of have to have these sort of very heavy headphones that are not something that you wear while you drive. In terms of VR, a lot of these technologies could enhance this. And so we have done some work on a shape-changing device, haptic device, that is used in VR, is used to mimic different objects that you would encounter in a virtual environment. And sort of having this haptic sort of tangible object to hold is important to get the feeling of actually interacting with the object. But then if you're interacting with a lot of them, that means a whole lot of like props that you have to have around you, and that's difficult. So what if you could have an object that could repurpose itself? And so suddenly, if you need a book, it's flat. If you need a flashlight, then it curls itself into an object that's like cylindrical, and it can give you the illusion of holding a flashlight. So these are really interesting applications of mixing in sort of different sub areas of HCI that are fun to collaborate with my colleagues. The VR one is done with Rob Tether, a colleague at Carleton.
Nice, thank you. So Diana, you had a question. Would you like to tell us?
When you talked about sort of some people don't always feel comfortable disclosing physical illnesses, I thought about mental illness. And what do you think are some possible applications for these kind of embedded interactions, but for mental illnesses instead? Do you have any thoughts?
So it's not something that I've explored a lot, but it has come into conversation a lot recently. The example I think about sort of the physical break could very much apply when you need sort of a mental break as well, for different sort of mental disabilities. So I think some of this is applicable, but like the digital well-being and just sort of mental health well-being in general is such an interesting area that I haven't explored yet. But it's the topic of my grad class, of the theme in my grad class this term. And so I'm really looking forward to working with students to explore a few of these. It's always fun to get different perspective on this. Great question.
Thank you. And then Victor, you have a question. Would you like to tell us?
Yeah, sure. So first, hi, Audrey. Great to see you again. So I used to work with Audrey in her lab when I was doing my first postdoc. So it was a great experience, and I agree with her that her lab is amazing. So whenever you see her, looking for students, postdocs, please join. Anyway, so my question is, so many of your projects that you do, Audrey, do not have a visual screen. So, which is great because I like different kinds of interactions other than just like a visual thing. But can you speak to what kind of interactions that can be engendered without the screen, and what are the pros and cons with other forms of like output?
Yeah, it's a good question. So some of the fact that we don't work with screens was on purpose, and some was because of just constraints. It's for designing sort of bendable devices, having access to flexible screens is useful, but complex. And so I think some of the devices that we've built, sort of some of the interactions could be integrated in devices with screens, but not, our prototypes don't tend to have them. I think sort of not having screens enables different types of output, to focus on different types of outputs. Maybe it's more integrating haptics and vibration as an output, and it enables sort of non-visual interactions, and for people to sort of have it in their pocket and not like have the habit of taking it out to look at what the output is, and just sort of interact with it directly. And then there's devices where sort of an output may not be necessary. On a flexible pen, you know, you could write something on it, but the way I'm holding it, there's just really no place for me to read anything on it. So other than as an advertisement, when I place it on my desk, you know, screens are not necessary everywhere. So that's not a bad thing.
Thank you. And Andreas, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Audrey.
Hi.
So when I think of shape-changing interfaces, first think of inflatable shapes. So I remember an example of an USB thumb drive that shows its state of memory by the level of inflation. As I'm not an expert in this area, I would be interested to know to what extent this type of interface is still a current development direction, and what is the current state of the art here? Do you have experience on that side also?
So we haven't done a lot of things on inflatable user interfaces, but I know it's still sort of an ongoing topic, and I saw a few titles with inflatable at the upcoming TI in the upcoming TI program. So I think it's one way to do shape change that is quite interesting, because it doesn't require electronics inside the objects, well, depending on how you make it work. So it can make for quick sort of prototypes as well, because you can have small electronics to make it work separately. One of our own work on this was to have kind of small fabric samples that we gave to designers, and it's a sort of mini electronic pump that would add air into a balloon that we slid between two pieces of fabric, and so the fabric would expand and would contract, and that was sort of cheap, easy, and it really worked for our purpose of having that sort of as a quick sort of sample for designers to play with and to figure out how can they, if they want to, and how can they integrate that into their clothes. So I think it's one way to do it. It certainly has advantages over shake memory alloy, for example, but you know, everything has pros and cons.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Audrey. So I think we're going to conclude our formal part
Actually,
here.
Sorry, or I think
sorry.
Albert actually typed in a question.
Oh, sorry,
so
Albert has one more
we can
question.
Get to that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You're muted.
Albert, we can hear you.
You're muted.
So thank you for the prototypes you've shown. They really look cool. I've got one question. When we think of pushing this beyond the lab, when we think of impact in the real world, one of the issues that always seems to come up is energy. You talked about pumps, you talk about these things. So what is sort of the technologies where you would think are sort of the easiest to solve the energy problem? Because a lot of things, when we change, say, shapes, takes a lot of energy. If we, for example, inflate something, we have to start a motor. If we think of mobile devices, which we want to have run over days. So what are the technologies you would look first if you really want to go towards deployment where energy is an issue?
I don't have an answer for you. It's a great question, but not something that we've really sort of considered and looked at. And so the truth is, I don't know.
I think this is like a fascinating direction to me. Audrey, you totally convinced me in the potential of these technologies. And I think that for us as a community to start thinking of what needs to happen, what are the technical requirements to take them out of the lab into production, into kind of mass market. What's the implication, not only in terms of energy, but also kind of in terms of sustainability and in terms of right, some of the work that you've shown is beautiful artisanship, right? So how do we train artisans to work with these materials? How do we bring these materials into mass productions of textiles around the world? So I think there are fascinating questions that kind of Alberts is leading to, that kind of transitioning from the lab into the real world. So thank you for sharing this with us. This is beautiful work, and congratulations for all the TI papers, and congratulations to your students and postdocs. I think this will conclude our formal part, but everyone is invited to stay with us and chat. I just want to mention that next week we'll have Andreas Reiner with us. We will continue the conversation, so feel free to join us. And also a reminder that we record these conversations and they are available for you to share with your students. So feel free to share this. All the recordings are available from our website. I'm kind of responding to a question that I received, but I think it's important to refresh and remind everyone that we have this. Thank you.